Live. Hey, what's up, comic book fans? This is Pete from Comic Books Transformed, where we talk about the adaptations from comic books into movies and streaming shows. Now, the property that we're talking about today is something that we've never talked about on this channel. And so I'm super happy to have my good friend over there, Mike Bongiorno from Pop Culture Man Children. How you
Hello.
doing, Mike?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, man. I am very excited because, like I was just saying, we haven't covered this property. I am talking about Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I have a history with Doctor Who. I'll tell you about it, but I'm very curious about yours. So, when did you first start watching Doctor Who?
2009. I was in
Hmm.
grad school and I don't remember how. I don't remember
Hmm.
why. I mean, that was a very fuzzy time. There was a lot. I was smoking marijuana like all day, every day at that time.
Right.
I had a very weird life at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and I went through all of Eccleston, Tennant, and the beginning of Matt Smith. And then from then on, I was just following it as it aired. And I've watched it the whole way through. Like, I know a lot of people fell off. I very much liked Peter Capaldi, and I
Hmm.
liked Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. I didn't think her stories were very well written,
Okay.
but I've liked almost every person to play the Doctor. Actually, my least favorite is Matt Smith.
Interesting. Okay.
Um, but uh, I gotta say, I feel a little bit of that buzz that I felt when I first
Yep.
saw A Force Awakens. I was like, "Oh my
Hmm.
God, we're back! We're doing it." It
Yeah. Yeah.
feels like Doctor Who.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, really good point. And Doctor Who, just to give context to what we're talking about today, we're talking about the 60th anniversary special, which has been broken into 3 1-hour segments. And the first one is called The Star Beast. And it sees the return of David Tennant, which
Yeah,
that's kind of like those X-Wings in the Force Awakens trailer, right? It's just kind of being like, oh, I recognize that. I know that.
yeah,
That's from when I was a fan. So it sounds like actually you and I are Who appreciation is kind of similar. I actually distinctly remember when I first started watching it. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I caught one of the Eccleston episodes. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. I didn't
uh-huh.
know any of the lore of the show. I just knew it existed. It's one of those things like through osmosis, just being into
Right,
science fiction and stuff. You kind of know some of the details,
right.
and then I think I maybe watched one episode that had a Dalek in it, and I was just so blown away by this weird kind of like retro sci-fi vibe that it had. Like when one of the Daleks zapped a soldier and you could see their skeleton on the inside. I was
Yeah,
like, whoa, this reminds me of like sort of like 1960s sci-fi.
yeah,
Did,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um
I mean, it's so funny when you look at like Eccleston, and I mean, now it's on Disney Plus, and you see the Disney logo, which blows my mind, and
yeah,
it looks so good now. I mean, the amount of money they're spending now is incredible. Even from like Eccleston's time to now, or the beginning of David Tennant to now, it's like holy shit! Like they've got a lot of
yeah,
resources now, which is
yeah. Yeah, especially like behind us right now, for those of you that are just listening, I have a picture of the inside of the TARDIS now, like the 14th Doctor's TARDIS, and it's just incredible, the inside
yeah,
of it, this gigantic set. Um, so, I did see the Doctor regenerate, and for me, that was kind of a revelation. I think that, like, when it comes to each of these franchises, there's kind of like a key thing that everyone always obsesses about. And I
yeah.
think that when it's a person that's like an outsider that kind of just knows about the franchise,
Mm.
there's one aspect that everyone cares about, even if they don't actually watch the show, right? And I think the regeneration is the thing that everyone kind of
Yeah.
obsesses about. So I was going to ask you. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, just as an example, that's like I no longer really care about Marvel, but I want to know what the stinger scene is in every movie. I'm always like,
Yeah,
what was the end credits? What did they tease? What happened?
right, right. Which character are they bringing in,
Right,
right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So when you watched it, right? Because I think you said that you started with Christopher Eccleston. Did you start at the very beginning of his season, or was it just kind of random?
Yeah, I started at the time I started, it was all on Netflix.
Okay.
So I started at the beginning of Christopher Eccleston, which I think is a good place to start.
Hell
I should
yeah.
say over the years, I have watched, I'd say, a handful of the Fourth Doctor episodes. I think I watched the first 3 or 4 stories of the First Doctor.
Oh,
So I have
cool.
a little bit of experience with the older Doctors, but certainly not all of it.
Yeah.
But those are the real hardcore fans.
Yes. Um, I have watched a couple of the older Doctor Who episodes too. There was this one guy, his name was Mitch, and his brother Matt plays role playing games with me, and they would have almost like a movie night, and it would be just like we go watch old Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah.
And I watched some really great old Tom Baker Fourth Doctor episodes. I have not seen anything with the First Doctor at all. I've seen like stuff with Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee. I didn't see anything with Sylvester McCoy, who was essentially like the last Doctor before the show ended. But I was going to ask you, like, how do you feel about those shows, the old BBC Doctor Who?
Well, I mean, they were like real teleplays. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of have to go into them not expecting what Doctor Who is now.
Mm-hmm.
You're almost watching a play. I mean, often it's dialogue driven and it's in like 1 or 2 locations. I do like the Fourth Doctor, I think, and I'm not the first person to say this, that in the sort of cultural consciousness, the Fourth Doctor is the Doctor. Still,
Right.
the Fourth Doctor was the Doctor the longest. He was the Doctor longer than anyone else was the Doctor.
Right.
I think a lot of the eccentricities and quirkiness that everybody brings to the character sort of begins with him.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. David Tennant might be giving him a run for his money. I mean, he's very, very popular.
Yeah.
And he came back for the 50th special, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's back again. And of course, he's been doing a lot of the
Big Finish.
Shows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think they all do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've listened to a couple of them too. But I was going to say, do you have a particular new Doctor that is your favorite? Is David Tennant your favorite?
David Tennant is, well, sometimes I say Capaldi's my favorite because I like that he's mean and old.
Yeah.
But Tennant, I don't know. Tennant was the one that I fell in love with. So it's like, it's like the one I entered with. So in some aspects, when I see Tennant, it's like, yes, that is the Doctor. That's the Doctor that I judge every Doctor on.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because for me, I watched a few random episodes. I watched some of the Eccleston episodes. Then he regenerated. I'm like, okay, who's this new guy? And I think I remember David Tennant from Harry Potter and the was it Goblet of Fire, right? He's in that one.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I watched a couple episodes of him. I'm like, oh, this is fun. He's different from the other guy. Then there comes the episode where Rose and him separate, and she's in one other universe and he's in the other. And they do this sort of montage where they're on opposite ends of this wall. And I was like, wow, this is really good for this sort of cheesy science fiction show. That's where I got hooked because the musical beats. And, one thing that we should bring up too is that there's been essentially 3 showrunners since Doctor Who has come back. There's Russell T. Davies, there's Stephen Moffat, Chris Chinaball. Is that the...
No.
What's that?
Kibnall.
Thank you. And, like Russell T. Davies, especially, I think he was very much a fan, or like really wanted them to have this like crazy orchestral music,
Yeah.
And did you ever see that special where it's just like the music of Doctor Who and like David Tennant's? Yeah.
When he came back too, the what's his name? Murray Gold was the composer for all of Russell T. Davies' era and all of Stephen Moffat's era. And then when Moffat left, that's the show itself really kind of was reborn or regenerated with Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, Chris Chibnall as the showrunner, and I forget their name, another person doing the music. So now for this 60th anniversary special, or for the foreseeable future, Russell T. Davies is back as the showrunner.
Right.
And he just, we'll get into it, but I love him. And Murray Gold is back, and he's using some of the old themes. I get chills hearing the David Tennant's theme, which is called "The Doctor Forever," and even some of Matt Smith's themes are used in this first episode. And Tennant's back, so it's not a secret that the show has not been doing well in terms of ratings and public appeal over the last couple of years. And I
Right.
think some of it has to do with fatigue, and I think some of it has to do with people having a negative reaction to a female doctor. But
Yeah.
I think the BBC was really just like, let's start again. Like literally, like Russell T Davies, you brought it back from the dead after 15 or 16 years off the air. Russell Davies really invented modern Doctor Who.
Yes.
He
Yes.
gives a
Yes.
lot of credit to things like Buffy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like Monster of the Week and very fast paced, funny dialogue, stuff like that.
Right.
And he brought back Tennant and he brought back Murray Gold, and so it really feels like, and of course you have Donna back, which is a fan favorite companion. There are
Yeah.
two more. There are two more Christmas specials. Sorry, there are two more 60th anniversary specials, and then a couple weeks later there is a Christmas special, which will be the first special with Ncuti Gatwa, who is going to be the new Doctor, who will be, I guess, the 15th Doctor.
The 15th Doctor, yeah. There even is like a little bit of confusion as to like what number is the Doctor, because like they had like the War Doctor,
Yeah,
right? And then they had
the
David
numbers
Tennant's
are all
now.
screwed up.
Right.
Yeah. And this
But yeah,
one, it's not. He's not the 10th Doctor now. He is the 14th Doctor. They
right.
make a big deal out of that because he dresses a little different and he has the memories of the last couple Doctors.
Right. And I want to get into that too with you for in a second, but I know that you've been covering over on your channel, Pop Culture Man Children. I know you've been covering like the Star Trek movies.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of the Star Trek show too, like the different versions of it?
I've watched all of the original series. I've watched all of Lower Decks,
Mhm.
and I've watched only a handful of Next Gen. Oh, sorry. I've also watched all of Strange New Worlds.
Okay.
So Voyager and Deep Space Nine are the only ones and Enterprise are the only ones, which I always forget Enterprise, are the only ones that I have very little experience with.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, like I'm actually a huge Star Trek fan. I'm like way more of a Star Trek fan than I'm a Doctor Who fan. And
No one is shocked.
what's that?
No one is shocked.
Yeah, right. And the thing is, right, is that with Star Trek and Doctor Who, it's kind of a similar thing because you had this old kind of version of the show which the fans are used to, and then there's like this revitalization years and years later, and they feel different. Like you had talked before about how like the original show felt almost like a play. I think one of the main differences from the original show and now is that it was like you'd have multiple episodes that were the same story arc. And it wasn't like modern television where it's like, oh, maybe there's a couple of monsters of the week and then there's the big bad,
right.
Or it's like a season-long crisis. It was just like 4 episodes is this one problem and 4 episodes is another problem. And with Doctor
minutes.
Yeah. And the new Doctor Who is like, it's just very much like Monster of the Week, like you said. And shorter. Do you prefer one style to the other?
That's a really interesting question because I do like the contemporary style, which not just Doctor Who uses, but a lot of genre uses, which is you kind of have Monster of the Week, but there is an overarching thing above us that you kind of reach at the end of the season. But sometimes I have felt over the last couple of years that sometimes that could be too much. And it's getting predictable. I actually liked in this episode, the Star Beast, it ended with the villain going, "Wait till I tell the boss."
Right.
It goes, I almost kind of fourth wall breaking, like, oh, that's cryptic. I really hate that. I feel like, oh, okay, of course, there's always that.
Right. And I think the boss is going to be Neil Patrick Harris, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually kind of prefer the older Doctor Who storytelling because older Doctor Who just feels like this different thing. Just as I prefer like Next Generation and the original series to the stuff that's on Paramount Plus. I feel like with modern storytelling, so much of it is like focused on emotion and the solution to problems usually has to do with characters' emotions, whereas older science fiction shows like Star Trek and the original Doctor Who was about like problem solving and like kind of practical, we need to figure out how this works. And so I kind of prefer that over like emotional stuff. And I mean, even this most recent special is very much like kind of about emotions and kind of
Oh,
dealing
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah.
things, you know. So we've kind of danced around it a little bit. Let's talk about the Star Beast. And so we have the return of Donna Noble, and we see her family, and we have the 14th Doctor arriving on Earth.
Yeah.
So are you a fan of Donna Noble? Is she like one of your favorite companions?
Yeah, she is. I mean, my favorite companion of the Tennant era is Martha.
Okay.
But Donna Noble is almost, I think, like, because there was no sexual tension between them, they were just best friends, and she was so funny, and she was like a breath of fresh air when she came in. I think she, in some ways, she's like even more than Rose, the quintessential companion to Tennant. They get their chemistry is so good together. So yeah, and her story ended in a very, like you were saying about when Rose is sent into a different universe. There's like 3 or 4 big tragic moments in Doctor Who, which like every Doctor Who fan will be like, oh, that's the moment where I cry. And another big one was the end of Donna's story originally, which was, if you're not familiar with it, she took some of the Doctor's being or energy, whatever, into her body, and that was too much for her human brain. So to save her life, he had to erase her memory.
Yeah.
So you couldn't remember all of the amazing things she did. And she went back to where she was when they first met her, which was sort of like insecure and unhappy. And so that was such a sad ending.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
15, they say 15 years in the show, and I was like, damn, it has been 15 years. It's crazy. And it's crazy that Tennant still looks good.
I know.
He looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
15 years later, they're getting back to it, and it's incredible.
Yeah. It blows my mind that 10 years ago was the 50th anniversary special.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like yesterday, because that was such a big, huge deal too.
Yeah, I absolutely adore that anniversary special, the Day of the Doctor with the 3 doctors, and the ending. Sometimes I'll just watch the ending again on YouTube, where like they're in the museum or the art gallery, and then the 10th Doctor leaves, and then you see what's his face show up again, Tom Baker. Yeah, I love that moment.
It's interesting because it establishes something that we're seeing now, which is that the Doctor can revisit an old version of himself.
Right. And so that's a big thing that's in this special, is that they're talking about like, well, why has he gone back? The Doctor doesn't know. And so we're thinking that maybe it might have something to do with Neil Patrick Harris's character, because essentially once these specials are done, he's gonna regenerate again.
2 episodes basically. He's going to be around for this episode we're talking about today, and then 2 more, and then he will regenerate into Shutigatwa, which is, you might know him from Barbie. The Barbie movie was the last big thing he did, right? He was, I forget which Ken he was, but he was one of the Kens.
Yeah.
And so this was really like, and I think it's a good way to do this, because 50th was, they led up to the 50th with all these different storylines. So the 50th became like this big finale / like movie, basically.
Yeah.
I think it was better this time around to go like, you know what, let's do like a few specials, we'll bring back a storyline from the comic that people like. We'll bring back music that you like, and just sort of like celebrate it. And then from there, we'll go to the new. But Russell T Davies staying on.
Yes. Yeah.
Exciting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that comic, I love it because they basically took that comic's cover and they made it like the poster for this special. It looks so good. I'm using it as the thumbnail for this episode. And the art is by
Gibbons.
Dave Gibbons, who also did Watchmen of all things. I mean, many things, but Watchmen is what he's probably the most well known for. Have you read that comic?
No, I haven't. I didn't. I wasn't aware of it until after I saw the episode. I think I'm trying to remember what Doctor it is.
It's Tom Baker.
Oh, it's the 4th Doctor. It's a 4th Doctor story. Interesting. No, I haven't read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have such a sweet spot, in my heart for like British Marvel comics, because it was called Doctor Who magazine, and Dave Gibbons is the artist, and Pat Mills is the writer, and like there's something about like there was a British Transformers comic in the 80s too, and that led into the American Transformers comic. Like the writer from that came over from the British comic onto the American comic.
Okay.
Simon Furman. Yeah, and you know, so many of my favorite comic book writers of all time are from Britain and from the 80s, like Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison. Yeah.
Right. What there was, it was like the British invasion, right? Wasn't there like it was like in the 80s where you had Watchmen and was it Elastic Man or Plastic? No,
Animal Man. But Grant Morrison, and eventually like Doom Patrol that he did, you know, all this like Vertigo stuff, basically like giving birth to Vertigo, Swamp Thing. And so I actually haven't read the comic either, but I'm assuming that it kind of has like the sensibilities of these like older comics that are written by British creators. Like yeah. And just like a little side note, this is like an observation. I love talking about this kind of shit with you. Don't you feel like when it comes to British heroes, right? Like Sherlock Holmes, the Doctor, you know, doesn't it seem more like it's about a practical man or woman kind of solving problems versus like a sort of muscular fighter solving problems?
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember there was a meme or, you know, something in the fan community that used to be passed around a lot online that was like the difference between the Doctor and Luke Skywalker, or the Doctor and other, and it was like, our guy doesn't use a weapon, he uses a screwdriver because he wants to fix things.
Right.
Which is so true. He runs around in a police box, and he wants to fix things. His, you know, he has two hearts because he's twice as empathetic.
right.
And it's all about, you know, the oath he took, right? Never cruel or cowardly, never give up, never give in. You know, it's all about like it's all about empathy, really.
Yeah.
Which is why, and I haven't alienated anybody yet. I might as well start now because
Let's do it. Jump in there.
This is why, of all the toxic fandoms, the one that blows my mind the most is toxic Doctor Who fans.
Oh boy.
Because I can understand, all right, you're a Star Wars fan and you don't like whatever.
Women.
Right. But you're a Doctor Who fan. Doctor Who is the most liberal, wussy, big-hearted thing. Who, like, for me, when I see a bigoted Doctor Who fan, I'm like, what do you like about this show? Like, what have you been watching?
Right.
Like,
well, okay, so you're opening up the can of worms and stuff. So I kind of wanted to go down this route. So they had this little clip where they showed David Tennant's 14th Doctor showing up on Skaros, which is where the Daleks come from.
Yes.
And okay, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And so basically, Davros, the creator of the Daleks, he is just a regular looking person at this point. Yeah. Even though in the lore, he's got a burned face, his eyes don't work, he has extra eye up here, he's in a wheelchair. Yeah. And Russell T Davies, I know you know this, I'm just kind of telling the whole audience, is that like he didn't want to have a disfigured or disabled villain.
Right.
And I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. And some people were like, oh, you go woke, you go broke. Mom. And then some people, which I understand this, were like, well, it's good to have representation of differently abled people, but you don't want them to necessarily be the villains.
Right.
I honestly, maybe I'm wrong, but when I watched that, it was a clip. It was a little short film that was part of the Children in Need, which they do, I think, every year in England.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was earlier in the timeline. To me, I was like, oh, he's not that yet because he seemed young.
Mm-hmm.
At least I don't know if you watched any of the Peter Capaldi episodes, but there's an episode, it's a really great cold open of one of the Peter Capaldi episodes where he lands and there's like this weird beach where like there are these hands coming out of the sand and they're like grabbing you, and there's this little boy that he's trying to save, and he finally saves him, and he's like, what's your name? And he's like, my name's Davros, and he realizes he just saved one of his arch enemies as a child.
Right. Yeah, I actually have seen that cold open. That's really good. Yeah.
So I just thought this was earlier.
Yeah.
he's not there yet, but you know.
Yeah. So I think that's that makes sense what you just said. You know, I personally think like that Davros, the character, his identity is kind of bound to his condition. Like his identity is bound to being in a wheelchair like device and not being able to see and having like an
Well,
eye up here.
it's more than a wheelchair. He is in a Dalek, basically.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like the Daleks in the lore were characters that were not, they didn't look like what they look like now, and I think they were radiated. It's changed over time.
Yeah.
But they were a metaphor for Nazis. Through their fascism and through their never-ending desire for war and empire, they mutated and became these horrible, evil, inorganic things.
Yeah.
He is sort of representing that.
Right, exactly. He's essentially like one step before the Daleks.
Yeah.
So to me, it makes sense to have him look like that. I understand you don't want to just have disabled people being represented by villains, right? But even in this episode, the Star Beast, you have a woman who's in a wheelchair and she ends up saving everyone at one point too.
Right.
So I'm always a firm believer of let's make new characters that are positive representations of people that are normally not represented versus like reimagining an existing character.
I understand.
That's just go ahead.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
I understand what you're saying. I don't know if I totally agree, but I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we could just kind of keep going down this road. You know, do you feel like
It's good thing YouTube doesn't show you the unlikes anymore.
Oh yeah, right. I think on my channel though, the unlikes are represented by people just not watching. So you know, that's what happens. Just no one watches. You know, but just kind of going back to this episode now. Another thing that I'm sure, like that toxic Doctor Who fandom would glom onto, is that Donna Noble has a transgender daughter, and Danny and I, you know, on our other channel, the Lasercast, we were giving praise to certain movies that came out in the past year where the idea of a person being a transgender person was not necessarily the main issue or something they focused on. It was when we did our Evil Dead Rise review.
Yeah, I was there for that.
Yeah. Oh, duh, you were there. Jesus Christ. Okay, sorry. But in this episode, essentially the only time they reference, maybe there's two times, but essentially there's these like sort of bully boys that kind of come by on a bike and they call her by her original name. And then I think the grandmother says something too.
Well, but there's it kind of does play into the end, which is I found fascinating, which is they make her almost in a way a symbol for the Doctor. Because at the end, Donna remembers, but she does not die, and it's because she passed down the meta crisis into her child, and the child has all those memories of the Doctor in it, and I know, when I watch it, I'm like, this is amazing, and I could hear people's like forehead veins getting upset,
throbbing, yeah.
The Doctor says the Doctor is male, and no, Tennant says the Doctor's male, and then Donna says, and the Doctor's female, and then Rose, the daughter, says, what does she say? She says, and both and more.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So it's interesting. So for people who really wanted the return of Tennant to refute the former Doctor and to try to like put to bed the female Doctor that we had, this is further establishing something. It's in some ways even more radical than having a female Doctor, because it's establishing that the Doctor is basically, in a sense, non-binary. Because I don't know if you watched the Jodie Whittaker episodes, Jodie Whittaker had attraction to females. So, and again, this is within line of contemporary gender and sexual theory. Like, despite the Doctor being a male or a female, their sexual preference was still towards female. Right? It's not
Interesting.
like Jodie Whittaker liked men all of a sudden.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I see. I have a blind spot for the Jodie Whittaker era because
Yeah.
what happened was I kind of stopped midway for the Matt Smith stuff. I came back for the end of his run, which I really loved, and then Peter Capaldi. I think I watched a little bit of the first series and then I stopped, and I didn't watch any of Jodie Whittaker. So you know way more than I do.
Yeah. So here's the thing: Russell T Davies, his big thing before Doctor Who was he created Queer as Folk, which was a
Really? I didn't know that.
Not the HBO one, the original English.
The British? Okay.
I don't know how much he has to do with the American remake, but that was his first big thing. And he's a very, very open gay man and hugely liberal, progressive man. Yeah. So he really changed the Doctor in many ways. I mean, and I'm not the first person to say this, but if you look at the older Doctor, he was very liberal and he was very much a hero, but in some ways he was very sort of colonial. Like he thought of the aliens he was saving as not necessarily on his level. Whereas when Russell T Davies reinvented the show and reinvented the Doctor, he became much more of this sort of big-hearted, progressive, openly loving person. Love is what saves the day.
Yes. And there's a lot of that in this episode. There's this great part where David Tennant, he's telling Donna after she has her memories back that like losing her like killed him inside. It killed him. He says it like multiple times, and there's this emotional it's definitely different from the pre-Russell T Davies era. I was going to say though, you and I, it seems like every time that we record that we always talk about The Last Jedi and we talk about Rise of Skywalker. Now, Rise of Skywalker is this sort of like knee-jerk reaction to The Last Jedi, and they're trying to like right things that maybe the fandom thought was wrong or a part of the fandom thought was wrong. Don't you feel like this is kind of the inverse of that scenario?
Right. And my fear was that it wasn't. My fear was, oh no, they're bringing back Tennant. They're not just going back to a man, they're going back to the most famous man.
Yeah.
And maybe in some ways that's what the BBC wanted, but what Russell T Davies is giving us is he's in no way discounting any of the canon or continuity of what Jodie brought. And he in the first episode we have a transgender main character who basically says I'm trans because the part of the Doctor is me and something about the Doctor is essentially non-binary, which is wild. Although, people can argue whether or not that's good or bad or whether it makes sense because it seems like the character Rose is female presenting. But, it does feel like an inverse because it's sort of saying like, we are not going to back down. We're not going to listen to the most vocal, vitriolic, small-minded part of our fandom.
Right. Because the small-minded, vitriolic part of any fandom, whether it's comic books, Star Wars, Star Trek, or Doctor Who.
Every fandom has toxicity into it. Every fandom has toxicity, I believe. I can't think of any fandom. Very few fandoms I can think of that like have no toxicity in it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it's
right. And the thing is that like
Care Bears. I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
Care Bears. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Or She-Ra, right? But like,
not even.
Oh, Jesus Christ! But I was gonna say that like there seems to be two different camps in that small vitriolic group where it's like people that are like, this isn't what would happen in the story. These characters wouldn't make this decision. Sure. This isn't the way it used to be in the old days. Then there's the other side, which is like, oh, there's too many women or there's too many black people. And sometimes what'll happen is you'll get people that are kind of a mix of both and they'll inspire each other, or there's some that are okay with one part, but they're not okay with the other part. Right. And I think that like The Last Jedi and the Star Wars sequels got a combination of both.
Right. I want to make clear that I think if you don't like The Last Jedi in terms of its storytelling or whatever, or if you don't like the Jodie Whittaker, like I said, Jodie Whittaker, I think is a good doctor, but I think her stories, the writing is the weakest.
Right.
So if you have critical beliefs of that kind, I don't want to lump you together with bigots. Although I would say, look within yourself and ask yourself, is any of that informing your beliefs? Because sometimes people say, I'm not a bigot. I'm just so fucking furious that The Last Jedi had Luke and he didn't do anything cool. And it's like that level of anger that you're at doesn't feel like normal anger towards a movie. Like maybe look at what's the well that's feeding that.
Yes.
And see
Yes.
what's there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to address that well, because I know I did a little research into Doctor Who, prepping for this return, and I know that there's this controversy with the Jodie Whittaker Doctor with the timeless child.
Yes.
Okay, and so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. Like, what did you think of that whole revelation?
It's not great. Know what they did, Pete? The best way to explain it is they added a lot more canon as a way of trying to shed canon. And I know that sounds like it doesn't make sense, but the idea was, in the original show, for the first many seasons, we knew nothing about the Doctor other than he was alien. And then as time went on, we learned more and more. And then there was the Master. We learned Gallifrey, and we learned what Time Lords were. And by the time you got to like the Matt Smith era, we knew a lot. We knew that he had a real name and blah, blah, blah. We knew so much. He ran away because of this and that. So what Chibnall wanted to do was wanted to bring it back to, we know nothing about the Doctor. The Doctor's a total mystery. But how do you do that with all this continuity? He added this storyline where basically the Doctor finds out that the Time Lords had been lying to him. He's not just any old Time Lord. In fact, the Time Lords learned how to regenerate themselves from him.
Right.
Because they just found this child somewhere.
Right.
So you understand what I'm saying? Like, it was an attempt to sort of factory default back to the beginning of, we know nothing about the Doctor.
Yeah.
But that pissed people off, and I can understand why. I mean, it's super, super convoluted. I have to say, I liked a lot of Jodie Whittaker's individual stuff. Like, I really loved the Rosa Parks episode. Fucking liberal. But but no, I like a lot of her individual stories, but Jodie Whittaker's bigger arcs, I think, don't really work. Okay. And because that, a lot of her finales, I think, don't really work.
Okay. Yeah. See, and I didn't watch most of it. I know that like Chibnall, he was a writer on the show during the Stephen Moffat era, and I think that some people didn't really like his episodes during that time either.
Chibnall had a really good grasp on character and a really good grasp on drama, but he didn't have the sci-fi bones. You know what I mean? Like the sci-fi, which you need that weird sci-fi brain. I don't think Chibnall had it as much.
Yeah. I'm not knowledgeable enough to kind of give my 2 cents on it, but this doesn't really contradict that, though, this special.
No, it doesn't. And Russell T. Davies has said in interviews that he's not going to contradict it.
Okay.
But he's also, I think, not going to address it.
Yeah. They do that a lot in comic books, that's for sure. So bringing it back to the Star Beast, didn't you feel like it was a lot like E.T. when Rose discovered the Star Beast?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It was like E.T. Yeah, and I think that was purposeful. I think it was an homage, especially when the Meep is like hiding amongst the toys. It's absolutely from E.T.
Yes. So I typed this out when I was watching the episode, but what are they called? The Wrath? Can I say that those fucking aliens that look like grasshoppers? The Wrath?
It looks like it's Wraith, but I don't think it's said like. I think it's like Wrath Warriors or something.
Wrath Warriors. Okay, fine. I'll just say Wrath Warriors. I'm starting to sound like fucking Scooby Doo over here. Wrath. The Wrath Warriors are trying to get the Meep at first, and you're under the impression that like, oh, they're trying to get it for some evil reason, but it turns out the Meep is this fucked up creature.
Right.
And when they start flying around, I'm like, holy shit, they look like parademons from DC, right?
Yeah, yes.
That's our shout out to Scott Snyder there, right? But Zack Snyder, I always fucking do that. I always do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Scott Snyder's a comic book writer.
Oh, I was gonna say, is there another person? Yeah.
Yeah. But they were great. I mean, this looked so good. There's this one sequence where the Doctor is just like leading Donna Noble's family out of her house and down the street, and he uses the sonic screwdriver to make these shields.
Yes, that's a new thing.
Right, that's a new thing, and I felt that was sort of a way to kind of evolve it to like comic book levels, but not let the Doctor lose his identity.
Interesting. It's funny. You've had like the TARDIS for this show is 60 years old, and to me, it's always amazing when a writer can figure out something new to do.
Yes.
And in this episode, we have two things. We have the Doctor first drawing a screen and then using it like a monitor screen.
Yeah.
And then there's the moment you're talking about where he draws like a shield with it. It's very interesting. But that was again, that's one of the Russell T Davies quirks. Russell T Davies really liked things like that. Russell Davies is the inventor of the psychic paper, which he uses again in this as well.
That was probably my favorite joke of the whole episode, was when he holds up his thing and he's like, I'm the minister of knowledge or something. And he says, oh, it says it's the mistress of knowledge. He's like, catch up.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I don't really remember the sonic screwdriver being as big a deal in the older version of the show.
No, I don't think it is. Well, first of all, I think the second or third Doctor was the first one to have it.
Okay.
The first one doesn't have one. And then I think one of the Doctors later on doesn't use one. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Tennant used it a lot. Matt Smith used it a lot.
Yeah.
But you remember, the third Doctor didn't even travel in time. That's
right.
Where he doesn't have a TARDIS. He's like, that's where the whole unit stuff comes from.
Right.
Yeah.
And I like that stuff. I watched a few episodes with him too, and I was really digging that.
He was like an old man, but he would do like kung fu moves.
right. Yeah, it just has this amazing weird lore, and
it's totally weird.
Every new character version of the Doctor brings so much to it. But like just kind of going back to the Star Beast and this episode, you have essentially these Wrath warriors coming after the Star Beast. The Star Beast seems like this cute creature that you feel for at first.
Yeah.
And then there's reference to a like lunatic sun, or basically like a sun that made the Star Beast people go crazy. The Meeps people go crazy.
Yeah.
And that is such a British thing. That's so Grant Morrison to say that it's a lunatic sun.
Right.
You know,
it was a sentient sun that lost its mind.
Right.
So weird.
Right. And then you have these like British soldiers or whatever that are under its influence, and they look great. And then just like everything was like a level above previous Doctor Who,
Yeah.
Were you satisfied with the way that Donna was essentially saved?
Yes, I was. I guess I always wanted a happy ending for Donna. And yeah, I was satisfied. I mean, that's sci-fi, right? You write yourself into a corner, then you figure out a way out of it. I mean, we can nitpick it, right? In the original show, if I'm remembering correctly, the reason why she was gonna die was because he had so much memory and so much knowledge it couldn't fit in a human brain.
Yeah.
And I feel like now what they're saying is it's a meta crisis. It's more like power in her body, and then they let the power go. Doctor Who, but that's the thing. Doctor Who has, 60 years of continuity. Yet Doctor Who will kind of hand wave continuity away.
Yes.
Doctor Who will say, in the TV movie, which was the 8th Doctor,
right, Paul McGann,
I'm half human.
Right.
We just never mention that ever again.
Yeah.
The Valiard. Who's the Valiard? Is it a person? Is at some point later on they say the doctor's the Valiard, and then like it's all very malleable. So
Yeah.
I feel like you can't. There's no nitpicking with Doctor Who continuity. Doctor Who continuity is, I think, like a fool's errand.
Dude, you know your stuff though. Referencing the Valiard and all the earlier Doctors, cool. I'm excited because as far as my like regular friends I interact with pretty normally, like there's you, there's Danny, there's Brian, and they don't know this kind of Doctor Who stuff. So it's cool that you do. You know, would you want to come back on and do the other two specials
Sure,
too? Yeah.
Yeah,
So, what are you hoping to get out of the next two specials?
I think we're going to learn why the Doctor is back. When the Doctor became Peter Capaldi had been in the show earlier as a different character. He had played a character in, I believe, a Tennant episode, the episode with oh crap, what episode was it? It was, oh well, I forget what it was, but it was an episode where Peter Capaldi played the father of a family that he saved. So when they hired Peter Capaldi to be the Doctor, they actually wrote it into the story. The Doctor, he says, like, I know this, I recognize his face. And then at a few episodes into his season, he remembers the old story, and he realizes that he picked the face of someone he saved as a way to remind himself who he is and what he's supposed to do.
Oh,
so, again, that's a little change in, there's little tweaks in continuity that then opens things up.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm not sure what it's going to be, but it seems that the Doctor has chosen to be David Tennant's face again to remind himself something. I don't know what.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. I'm glad that you bring that up because to me, whenever the Doctor regenerates, he always acts kind of surprised. And I know it's like to kind of mirror what the audience is thinking or to make it more exciting. Right. Like, oh, I'm a girl, or, like, it seems like, well, wouldn't he either have a control over it or like, why would he become so different looking? And
right.
What you're saying is it kind of almost implies that the Doctor's almost like this over being, and then like each regeneration is like a piece of him, and so it's like this over being is like picking what he would look like next,
Yeah, or something subconscious is doing it.
Subconscious, right.
He's trying to send a message to himself. I should say, I didn't say this before, but I think this is something you'd find interesting. As part of the Timeless Child lore,
yeah,
they essentially said that at some point the Doctor's memory was completely erased. So in fact, the first Doctor is not the first Doctor. He may have had millions and zillions of regenerations throughout his God knows how long history.
I see. Oh. Yeah, that's crazy. Because wasn't there also this implication that this Black British actress, that she was another version of the Doctor too?
Yeah, she was. I forget where the timeline she was. I think she was before the first Doctor.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And then also, besides that, isn't it also implied that the Doctor's from like another reality? And like,
it's kind of. I mean, that might be. I don't know if they're ever going to pick it up again. But basically, it's just like the Timeless Child. They just like the Gallifreyans just find a child that like can regenerate like crazy, and they basically take that power from the Doctor and use it for themselves.
That's fucked up, man. Oh man. Well, I'm curious as to what's gonna happen next. And talking to you, man, actually makes me want to go kind of close the gap with the previous Doctors. Like, I think it's all on it's on Max right now.
Is it? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I know it's on Disney. Just the specials are on Disney.
Okay. Yeah. And it's going forward, it's gonna be on Disney.
Yeah.
And Disney's kicking in some budget. Disney is more than just airing it. It's helping, which is the Disney empire, the Muppets and Star Wars and Marvel and now Doctor Who. There's nothing that Disney will not take.
Yes, Indiana Jones, and they own Predator and Alien, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Which that brings up my last question for you, Mike. And on your channel, on Pop Culture Man Children, you guys always end it by saying "go bye bye" like Animal. With me, I want to get a nice little plug from you. But I got one last question for you. If you take all the big sci-fi franchises that everyone loves, or to varying degrees, so you have Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, and not all of them are as equally popular, obviously, too. Is there any others that you would add to that, first off? Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, as far as sci-fi franchises go.
At the moment, I can't think of anything, but I'm sure there's something I'll think of later and be like, "Oh my god, how could I forget that?"
Right? Yeah. Maybe someone in the comments will be like, "You forgot this, dickheads." But anyway, out of those three, then Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, how would you rank them as far as your favorite, from favorite to least favorite?
So, favorite, having nothing to do with quality, just my own personal attachment. Star Wars is, I mean, I saw it as a kid. It formed me. I when I saw Star Wars, I think it was like 11 or 12, and Star Wars is like, it's like my religion. It's like, you know what I mean? It's so deep in me. Like, even when I hate it, I still watch it. Like, I hated Ahsoka, but I watched every episode. Like, I fucking hate this, but I had to watch it.
Yep, I've had that experience multiple times. So Star Wars number one, is Star Trek number two, and then Doctor Who?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, Star Trek, I'm almost getting into Star Trek more now. So, when I do the episodes on PCMC, I do it with my friend Vin Forte, who is a real Trekkie. So he's kind of coming from a place of knowing stuff, and I'm kind of coming from a place of I'm new to the fandom.
Okay.
So it would be Star Wars, Who, and then Trek. But you know what? I don't have a Star Wars tattoo, but I do have a Doctor Who tattoo.
Oh, are you able to show us?
So yeah, I have a TARDIS tattoo.
Very nice. Oh yeah, look at that.
So in some ways, I think there's something very deeply touching to me about the Doctor and his whole ethos.
Sure, excellent. Okay, yeah, I'd say for me, it's tough because Star Trek, I watched The Next Generation as a kid, like every Sunday with my parents, and we went to the theater to watch the movies. So I almost would put Star Trek first, but I feel like Star Wars is much more personally just for me and not my parents, my thing. I probably know the most about Star Wars, and then Doctor Who would probably be third. So I guess I'd have to go Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor
Who. Okay.
Yeah. Nice. So yeah, if you guys are watching, if you want to leave a comment, let us know. How would you rank these three? But Mike, I want you to explain where they can find Pop Culture Man Children and what it is.
So Pop Culture Man Children is a podcast that I have hosted throughout all of time. I am the timeless child. And it is a podcast that deals with all of pop culture and retro stuff and nostalgia stuff. Star Wars, Star Trek, movies, video games. We try to get esoteric. We try to do things that people haven't talked about, like episodes on Gravity Falls and episodes on Over the Garden Wall. Coming up for Christmas, I'm doing an episode on Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, which I say is a Christmas movie.
Oh my God.
But again, to annoy whoever may be watching, I think what makes PCMC stand out from a lot of similar content online, and I won't name who, but who I'm talking about, is we're not toxic.
Oh yeah,
hey,
that's my daughter. Yeah. No, I agree. You guys are not toxic. You guys are very positive, and I enjoy listening to your show. I feel like that's why you and I are, and then I also like, that you come on my show, I go on your show, because we just always try to think about the positive, and we don't. It's so easy to, like the Emperor, give in to hate.
Sure, right. And just like I do sometimes. It's not like my show has no. We're not criticizing things. We do criticize things,
right?
But try not to, be hateful and stuff like that. And can I pose a question to you? You don't have to answer it now. You can answer it the next time we do an episode.
Sure.
Who would be your ultimate fan casting for the Doctor? If you could pick any actor to play the Doctor, who would it be?
Okay, so who has not been the Doctor?
Who has not been the Doctor?
Okay. Do you have an answer for yourself?
I do.
Okay. Do you want to share yours?
Well, unless you want to wait until next time.
Let's wait until next time. We'll give a little cliffhanger for everybody
All right.
there. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I'll actually have a good answer. I mean, I'm thinking like Tom Hardy right now, but that's like so like knee jerk and dumb. I'll have a better one next time.
All right.
So if you guys want to see me and Mike talk about Doctor Who again, make sure you subscribe to the Comic Books Transformed channel, and we will see you guys